The stars were quiet when Lieutenant Mark Rayner's escape pod broke through the thick purple clouds above Zyrel, a forest moon unknown to most human maps. His body was weak, blood trickling down his forehead, and everything around him spun in a blur of color and pain. The war between humanity and the Karnak swarm had reached its peak, and Mark's ship had been torn apart in battle. Alone and wounded, he had launched himself away from the explosion just before his ship's core collapsed. Falling fast, through alien skies, he barely registered the strange, glowing trees rising to meet him. His pod crashed into soft moss, bouncing against vines that shimmered like threads of light. Then everything went black. When he opened his eyes, he wasn't outside anymore. The air was warm and sweet. Giant pillows and blankets surrounded him, and the walls looked like they were made from carved crystal and living wood. A huge shape moved nearby. Mark blinked, thinking he was hallucinating. But then she appeared, a tall girl with lavender skin, silver-white hair flowing like mist, and glowing blue eyes that studied him with innocent curiosity. Her long fingers gently poked his chest, then she lifted him easily, as if he weighed nothing. She tilted her head, smiled, and let out a soft, musical sound. Then she wrapped her arms around him and held him close. Mark was too weak to fight back. His muscles didn't move, and the strange air still made his head spin.
Ow.
But the alien girl didn't hurt him. She snuggled him like a child would with a toy, humming softly as she lay down, placing him against her chest. Her heartbeat was slow and calm. As she whispered softly in her own language, he caught one word spoken in broken English: Pluff. She thought he was a stuffed toy. At first Mark thought he was dreaming, but as the hours passed he realized the truth. Somehow he had ended up in the care of a child door, maybe a young alien woman who believed he was a harmless, soft thing to be cuddled. She was alone in a strange home, far too big and too gentle to be part of any war. Her kindness was almost surreal. She fed him soup made from glowing fruits and spoke to him as if he were a pet or friend. He didn't understand her words, but he could feel her warmth. He was her comfort, her treasure. Yet in the back of his mind, Mark knew something terrible was coming. He remembered the Karnak ships chasing his squadron, the screams over the comes, the dark shapes blotting out the stars. If they had followed him here, this peaceful moon wouldn't stay safe for long. And this alien girl who thought he was a toy wouldn't be ready for what was coming. He had to find a way to protect her, but first he had to survive and recover. So he let her hug him every night, listened to her songs, and watched the stars outside her window, waiting for the war to find them, because he knew it would. And when it did, he wouldn't be a plush toy anymore. He would be a soldier again. And she who had shown him kindness when no one else could would be the reason he fought. ChatGPT said, Mark spent the next few days recovering in the alien girl's strange but peaceful home, hidden deep within the glowing forests of Zyrel. Her name, he finally learned through her constant gestures and soft humming, was Ari, though she still believed he was some kind of soft, harmless being. She treated him with care and affection, bringing him glowing fruits, wrapping him in warm silks, and carrying him gently through wide crystal halls filled with lights that floated like fireflies. Each night she curled up beside him, holding him close as if he were her treasure. But while her world felt calm, Mark's mind never rested. He kept remembering the battle, the burning wreckage of his ship, and the endless swarm of insect-like Karnak ships spreading across the galaxy like a disease. He had seen too many fall human colonies turn to ashes, entire squads wiped out in seconds, and now he feared Zyrel might be next. One morning, while Ori was gone gathering something, Mark slipped from his resting place. His legs were still weak, but he could walk now, limping down the hallways lit by floating crystals. He came across a chamber filled with strange, glowing stones data crystals. When he touched one, it came alive, projecting symbols and sounds into the air. To his surprise, a language interface flickered, offering translation. He tapped carefully, unlocking ancient records about the Yalarior's people. They had once been starfarers, traveling in peace and beauty, solving problems with harmony instead of war. But when the Karnak rose, the Yalari refused to fight. They vanished from the stars, hiding in silence on forgotten moons like Zirel. They left no signals, no weapons, no allies. The galaxy thought they were extinct, and that made this place even more dangerous. If the Karnak found them, they would destroy them without mercy. Mark had seen it happen before. He had no doubt. What would follow if a scout ship spotted Zirel? As he learned more, he realized the Yalari had no defenses, no warning systems, and no idea the war had spread so far. They didn't know the Karnak were heading in this direction. He had to warn them. When Ari returned, Mark tried to speak. He used his hands, drew images in the dust, mimicked explosions in the sky. At first she tilted her head, confused. Then he activated the translator orb and let her hear his words. He said the danger was coming, that her people needed to hide or fight, that the swarm would find them. She listened quietly, wide-eyed and silent. When he finished, she didn't speak. She simply wrapped her arms around him again, held him tight, and whispered softly, "Pluff safe." He didn't know if she truly understood what he had said or if she just didn't believe it.
Ow.
Later, she brought him to the Elder Stall. Glowing beings that looked like statues of glass and starlight. Mark tried to explain, showing them images of burning planets, of the Karnak, of the swarm coming. But the elders only looked down at him with sad eyes. They touched his head gently, as if blessing a child, and spoke through Ori. She translated in broken English. "They thank you, Toy of Light, but we do not fight. We are hidden. We are forgotten." Mark clenched his fists, anger rising. Forgotten didn't mean safe. Hidden didn't mean invincible. He'd seen peaceful planets wiped away without warning. If the Yellow stayed passive, they would die. He looked at Auri, her eyes full of quiet trust, and knew he couldn't let that happen. That night, he sat beside a wide window, staring at the sky. The stars above Zirel were calm, but he saw something move, a dark shape, too fast, too sharp. A Karnak scout ship. It had found them. Mark's heart pounded. He couldn't rest. He couldn't pretend to be a toy anymore. Somewhere deep inside the escape pod, before crashing, he'd activated a final signal, something secret, something powerful. He prayed it had reached far enough, because now everything was at risk. Ori didn't see him as a soldier. She saw him as something soft, something safe. But when the war came crashing down on this moon, he would have to become something more. He would have to protect her, not just because she believed in him, because she was the only pure thing left. In a galaxy filled with fire, ChatGPT said, the sky above Zirel was still. But Mark's heart raced as he watched the dark shape in the stars move like a shadow with wings. He had no doubt it was a Karnak scout ship, silent and deadly, flying low enough to scan the land. But high enough to avoid attention? It was only a matter of time before more followed. He rushed back through the glowing forest paths to Ari's sanctuary, passing trees that shimmered and vines that whispered with the breeze. When he arrived, he found her humming to herself, gently brushing a plush version of him she had sewn from soft fabrics. She smiled when she saw him, but her smile faded when she saw his face. He pointed to the sky and mimed ships falling. She didn't speak. She took his hand, looked into his eyes, and nodded. Without a word, she led him deep into the heart of her sanctuary, through twisting tunnels of crystal and light until they came to a long-forgotten chamber, sealed by time and dust. There, glowing softly in the center, was a device unlike anything he had ever seen. It pulsed with a quiet rhythm, like a heartbeat. Ori touched it gently, and symbols lit up across the walls. She looked at Mark and said, "Old voice, it can help." As she activated it, the walls came alive with sound and color, showing visions of ships, planets, and something deeper, something hidden. Among the data, Mark recognized something human, the signal he had sent before crashing. Hades' beacon. It had reached this chamber. Somehow the Yellery tech had caught it. The message had traveled through old human relay satellites, activating a dark project never spoken of aloud, Spectre 1. It was a secret ship, a ghost weapon with no crew, no base, and no laws. Just a cold mission. Respond to humanity's final call and bring destruction to anything in its way. The Yllari didn't understand what they had received, but Mark did. That ship was on its way. And when it arrived, it would burn the sky. But it wasn't here yet, and the Karnak were getting closer. Already Ari's people were noticing strange sounds in the forest shadows moving without wind. The scent of oil and fire drifting through the glowing trees. Mark tried once again to warn the elders, but they still believed they were safe in hiding. Only Ori stood by him, listening, watching, trusting. He began to study the sanctuary's old tech more closely, though most of it was built for peace. Some devices were hidden away defense tools, ancient armor suits meant for ceremonial guards. He asked Ori to help him access them. She brought him keys made of light, and together they unlocked the chamber holding one such suit. It was large, elegant, and shaped for Yllari frames, but with Ori's help, he adjusted it. Soon Mark stood in a glowing exosuit, smooth and powered by crystal energy. It wrapped around him like a second skin, and for the first time, since the crash, he felt strong again. Just in time. That evening, a sharp sound cut through the forest, a Karnak drone breaching the outer trees. It was fast, with spinning claws and long-jointed limbs clicking as it scanned. Mark saw it from a high balcony and didn't hesitate. Leapt down, the exosuit catching him softly, and charged. The drone turned too late. Mark slammed in two. It, striking with a force far greater than any human strength. Sparks flew as they fought, and with one final blow, he smashed its head into the ground, silencing it. He turned to see Ori watching from above, her eyes wide. She had seen everything, the truth of what he was. He wasn't a toy. He wasn't soft or harmless. He was something else entirely. As he stood there, chest rising, suit glowing in the dusk, Ori came down slowly. She didn't speak. She stepped forward and placed a hand on his armor, then looked up at him with a new kind of gaze, not just gentle, but proud. It wasn't her plush anymore. He was her protector. And the battle hadn't even begun. Above the forest, the stars started to shimmer. More Karnak ships were coming. But Mark had his armor. He had Ari. And far beyond the sky, Spectre 1 was on its way, flying like death through the stars, answering. A silent human call that would soon shake the galaxy. The first Karnak ships broke through the sky like cracks in glass, dark and sharp, spreading across the horizon with glowing red engines. Their swarm moved in silence, creeping over Zyrel's forests with deadly precision. Mark stood at the edge of the sanctuary, his armor humming with soft crystal energy, his eyes locked on the smoke rising in the distance. Behind him, the peaceful home that once felt like a dream now buzzed with quiet fear. Alri stayed close, no longer treating him as a toy but as someone important, someone she believed in. The elders finally began to understand that hiding would not protect them anymore. Though their hearts were gentle, they allowed Mark to take the lead. With Ori translating what she could, he began building a defense plan using what little they had. He studied the old Yllari maps, found high tunnels in the cliffs, and placed watchers with signal flares in the trees. The Yllari did not know how to fight, but they could glide, they could fly, and their crystal tools could still burn. Mark trained a few willing ones to use what they had. Their soft hands learned to hold charged spheres. Their quiet eyes learned to scan the skies. Ori helped him prepare a wide-open path through the forest, luring the enemy toward a place where the tunnels could rain crystal fire from above. The first battle came fast. Karnak scouts burst through the trees, claws clicking, eyes glowing, spraying acid and fire. Mark led the counter with a squad of Yllari gliders flying above him, hurling bright pulses of energy. The suit let him move like lightning. He dodged beams, slammed drones into the ground, and blocked blades with crystal shields. He was everywhere at once. The Yllari had never seen war, but they followed him with growing courage. They fought for their home, their sky, their peace. Mark climbed one of the old wind towers, used its high view to guide a group of gliders into a flank position. From there, they destroyed a Karnak tank beast by luring it into a narrow path and collapsing. Crystal vines on top of it. Each hour, more enemies fell, but more came. The Karnak destroyers entered the atmosphere, dropping larger machines that crushed trees with every step. One fired a plasma beam that carved a hole through a mountaintop. Mark looked at the sky and prayed, where was Spectre 1? That night, fires burned at the forest's edge. Ari and Mark stood side by side, watching as the Yalari children were moved deeper into the hidden caves. The warriors were tired. The weapons were few. Mark's armor was cracked at the chest, its light dimming, but he kept going because Ari kept believing. She brought him a new piece for the Sutan, ancient Yalari emblem carved in crystal, and she placed it on his chest with shaking hands and said, "You are not soft anymore. You are bright." Then, as dawn began to break, the sky answered. A line of white light tore through the clouds, silent, perfect, fast. Then another, then another. The air bent, and the clouds vanished in an instant. Spectre 1 had arrived. Didn't roar, it didn't blink, simply moved. One moment the Karnak ships hovered above the trees. The next moment they were gone, split in half by invisible weapons, turned to dust by beams too sharp for the eye to follow. The destroyers fired back, but Spectre 1 phased through the blasts, flying in patterns no living pilot could mimic. It struck with cold precision, cutting the swarm apart like slicing leaves in the wind. The Karnak tried to retreat, but it was too late. The ghost weapon hunted them down one by one, leaving only silence in its wake. From the sanctuary balcony, Mark watched in awe. He had never seen the ship in action, no one had. It was a secret. Humans built in fear, designed not to be beautiful, but to be feared. And now it was saving a world not even human. He touched the crystal emblem on his chest and looked at Ori. Her eyes were wide with wonder, filled with the glow of the morning sun. He had promised to protect her, and now his past, the war, the weapon, the human fire, had come to keep that promise. But it wasn't over. Far above, higher than the clouds, a new shadow moved. Larger than any ship Mark had ever seen. Karnak, queen ship. Its shape blotted out the stars. Its engines shook the wind, and as its core began to glow, Mark knew this wasn't just a final wave. It was a death sentence. One attack and all of Zyrel would vanish. Spectre couldn't stop. It alone, not from the outside. It would have to go in. The sky turned dark as the Karnak queen ship moved slowly above Zyrel, its massive body blocking out the sun, its long arms unfolding like claws across the sky. The ground trembled with each pulse of its engines, and the air grew heavy, as if the world itself knew what was coming. From its center, a beam began to glow bright orange and red, charging with enough power to burn the forest, the sanctuary, and every living thing below, into ash. Mark stood at the edge of a high ridge, watching the light gather, knowing they had minutes before it fired. The Spectre 1 was still fighting in the upper sky, cutting down smaller ships and blasting the Queen's outer guards, but it couldn't break through the main hull. Its weapons weren't enough to stop the Queen's ship from the outside. When Mark made his choice, he turned to Auri, who stood beside him with fear in her eyes, and gently placed the crystal emblem she had given him into her hand. He told her he had to go up there to the heart of the enemy ship hand, stop the beam from inside. She tried to stop him, her hands trembling, but he cupped her face gently and said, "You made me strong. I have to finish it." She nodded, slowly, tears falling silently, and whispered, "Come back bright." With Ari's help, Mark climbed into a small Yalari relic craft that had not flown in centuries. It was smooth like glass, powered by light and memory. The Spectre cleared a path for him as he rose into the sky, slipping past Karnak drones and dodging plasma fire. The Queen's ship loomed larger and larger, until its black walls surrounded him like a mountain of metal and bone. The relic ship landed inside a narrow port tunnel, and Mark stepped out alone and ready. The inside of the Queen's ship was a maze of flesh and steel. The walls pulsed like veins, and the air was thick with the stench of oil and heat. Insects crawled across the floor, whispering in their own terrible language. Mark moved quickly, using his damaged Yellery armor to shield himself, blasting drones and pushing forward. The suit was cracked, his power low, but he didn't stop. He had to reach the core before the beam finished charging. He fought through narrow halls, dark tunnels, and rooms filled with crawling machines. He was cut, burned, bruised. His suit sparked with each hit, and his legs nearly gave out more than once, but he kept going. Then, in a chamber lit by red light, he saw a Hertha Karnak queen. She was massive, as tall as a building, her body covered in armor plates and her arms ending in long blades. Her face was hidden by a mask of bone, and her voice echoed like thunder as she screamed in rage. Mark didn't wait. He ran forward, firing everything he had. The queen roared and slashed at him, knocking him across the chamber. Pain exploded in his side, but he rolled to his feet and charged again. He ducked under her claws, fired into her chest, and used the last of his shield to block a deadly strike. Sparks flew, metal screamed, and the battle became a blur of fire and fury. Finally, bleeding and nearly broken, Mark reached the core, a massive sphere of glowing energy at the heart of the ship. He knew what he had to do. The only way to stop it was to overload his own suits. Energy crystal. It would destroy the core, but also take him with it. He hesitated for only a second, thinking of Ari's face, her warmth, the way she had once. Hugged him like a toy and later stood beside him as a friend. He smiled faintly, pressed his hand to the core, and whispered, "For her." The explosion tore through the Queen's ship like a storm of stars. From the ground below, Auri watched as the sky burst into white light. The beam died. The Queen's ship shattered, the Karnak fled. The forest was saved. But Mark was gone, or so they thought.
Ow.
Days later, deep in the sanctuary, the Spectre One returned, its engines quiet. It opened a hatch, and inside was something glowing, something not quite human, not quite machine. Mark's mind had been saved by the yellowy tech in his suit and the Spectre's last scan. His body was different now. He built from light and crystal, but he was alive. He stepped out, blinking at the gentle morning sun, and found Ari waiting. She ran to him, wrapped her arms around him, and didn't say a word. She didn't need to. He had come back. Not as a toy, not as a soldier, but as someone who had fought for her and who would stay by her side. Always. The air was quiet after the Queen's ship exploded, its pieces falling like black snow across the sky. And for the first time since Mark had crashed on Zarel, the forest no longer shook with fear. A soft wind moved through the glowing trees, and the sky returned to its deep purple blue, clear and calm. The Karnak swarm was gone, fleeing into deep space after the loss of their leader. The Yellary, who had once believed that hiding was the only way to survive, stood on the high cliffs in silence, looking at the sky with wide eyes, not quite believing they were still alive. Ari stood alone at the edge of the sanctuary, holding the crystal badge Mark had given her, its light now dim and cracked. She hadn't spoken much since the blast. She had seen the Queen's ship break apart in fire, had watched it fall, and in her heart she knew Mark had made it happen. But she had also seen him vanish in the light. She thought he was gone forever. The elders gathered in the central chamber and declared that the human, the one they once called Pluff, was now a hero of the Yellary. They built a tall tower, from crystal vines and polished stone, placing a statue of Mark at the top, carved in shining silver, holding a shield of light and looking up toward the stars. The children left small gifts at the base, tiny toys, glowing fruits, and drawings of the battle. For many days, Auri sat beside the statue, saying nothing, just watching the sky and holding on to the hope that maybe, somehow, he was still out. Then, one morning, a strange humming sound filled the air. The sky shimmered, and a soft white light came down like a gentle wave. The Spectre One returned, silent as always, floating down into a clearing near the sanctuary. The Yellari gathered around, unsure, hearts pounding. The hatch opened, and from the soft light inside, a shape stepped forward. At first they didn't know what they were looking at. The figure was tall, covered in smooth crystal lines that pulsed gently with blue light. His skin looked like polished stone, yet he moved like a man. His eyes glowed faintly, and his voice, when he spoke, was both human and something more. It was Mark. Not the same, not as he was before, but still him, his soul, his memories, his heart. The Spectre had scanned him before the blast and saved what it could. The Yalari tech in his suit had held his mind, his spirit, and now the two had worked together to bring him back, not in flesh, but in something new, a body of light and strength, a bridge between two worlds. Ori stepped forward, her breath caught in her throat, her hands shaking. He looked at her and smiled, soft and warm, just like before. She ran to him, threw her arms around him, and for the first time in days, she cried not from sorrow, but from joy. Mark held her, his touch gentle but sure, and whispered, "Told you I'd come back." The Yalari watched in silence, then bowed, not just to honor a hero, but to welcome one of their own. Mark wasn't just a human anymore, he was part of them. In the days that followed, he helped rebuild what was lost. He trained their defenders, guided the young ones, and worked with Ori to plant stronger shields around the sanctuary. Together they turned fear into hope. Word of what had happened on Zyrel began to spread. Ships from nearby systems came. Seeking the light they had seen in the sky, they came to learn, not to conquer. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel like a dream. It felt real. And every night, as the stars returned to their places above the forest, Ori and Mark would sit beneath the glowing trees, side by side. She no longer called him a toy, though sometimes she would smile and say it softly, just to see him roll his eyes and laugh. Each night before sleep, she would rest her head against his chest and listen to the soft hum of light that now lived inside him, a sound like a calm heartbeat, steady and warm, a sound that reminded her he was there, with her, not just for a moment, but always. Time moved gently on Zyrel after the great battle, and the sky above the forest slowly healed. The glowing trees grew taller, the rivers flowed without fear, and laughter returned to the halls of the sanctuary. Mark, now in his new crystal body, became a part of the Yulari's everyday life, not as a weapon, not as a soldier, but as a guardian and a friend. The people trusted him, and the children followed him through the garden paths, asking questions, wanting to hear stories about the stars, the war, and Earth. He never told them everything, only the parts that didn't hurt. Beside him always was Ori, who had once thought he was just a soft toy to hold. She no longer saw him that way, but her closeness never faded. Every morning they walked together among the glowing vines, and every evening she rested near him, her presence quiet, but full of warmth. She didn't speak much about the pain she had felt when she thought he was gone, but he could see it in her eyes, the fear that one day he might vanish again. Mark understood that fear. His new body was strong, a mix of ancient Yellery light and human memory, but even he didn't know how long it would last. There were days when his arms flickered or his thoughts felt heavy, but he never let her see that. He wanted her to feel safe. That was enough. One day, a Yellery elder came to them with news. A signal had been picked up from deep space, weak, but clear. It was Humaticall, from survivors on the edge of a broken system asking for help. The Yellery elders gathered and debated for hours, unsure if they should get involved again. They had lived in silence for so long, and the war had almost destroyed them. But now they had Mark, and with him, a bridge to the outside world. When he stood before the council, he didn't speak like a soldier. He spoke like someone who had seen what fear could do to good people. He told them the truth. If they stayed hidden forever, they would never know peace, only waiting. Helping others was a risk, but it was also a chance to shine, to rise, to matter. Owry stood beside him, holding his hand, and said only one word. Together, the vote was made. Owry would open the stars again, not with weapons, but with light. They would help rebuild. Mark helped lead the effort. Old ships were brought out from deep storage, powered with fresh energy. He and Ori flew together across the moon, guiding new sensors and placing beacons to keep Zyrel safe. Then, with a small group of Yellery volunteers, they left the moon behind and entered the stars. Their first mission was to find the source of the human signal, led them to a shattered world, once green, now gray, broken by war. A few humans still lived there, hiding in caves, their eyes wide when they saw the ship of light descend. When Mark stepped out, they froze. He saw the Yellery first, unsure. But then one soldier stepped forward and whispered, "Is that human?" Mark smiled, placed a hand on the man's shoulder, and said, "Close enough." They took food, supplies, and medicine from the ship and began to help. As they worked, Ori stayed close, watching the humans with kind eyes. The people began to understand that the Yellari were not enemies. They were healers, friends, and guides. More signals followed, and the Yellari ship answered each one, moving from one broken place to the next, spreading hope. Mark became known, not as a weapon, but as the light-burn, the man made of two worlds, who had died to save a moon and returned to help others rise. Stories of him spread through space, whispered from world to world. And for the first time in a long time, the name human was spoken with pride again. But at night, when the missions paused and the stars filled the sky, Mark would sit quietly. With Ori, far from the noise, they would watch the stars in silence, hands resting close, hearts steady. Sometimes she would lay her head on his chest and listen to the soft hum of energy inside him. And sometimes she would whisper, "You're still my Pluff," with a quiet smile. Mark would laugh, not with shame, but with peace, and hold her hand a little tighter. Because in the end, he hadn't just saved Zyrel. He had found something to live for, not glory, not war, not memory, just her. And that was more than enough.